You want to do your introduction?
Sure.
Today is Friday, July 18th,
15th.
2016, and this is the beginning of my interview with, what was your rank?
Joe Regnier.
What was your rank in the military?
I was a petty officer, second class, an E5.
Okay. This is in Marion County at Cell State in Ocala, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Sam Kwiatkowski, and I'll be the interviewer. Joe Regnier, could you tell us your full name and address?
Sure. My full name is Joseph Francis Regnier Jr., Ocala, Florida, 34480.
Okay. So you want to continue with the pictures?
Sure. I'm just sharing some pictures. We said a picture is worth 1,000 words. My Navy career began in really in April of 1985 when I was 17. I was still in high school. I was in need of a direction in my life. I was a junior at the time in high school, and I happened to meet a recruiter in the office of my high school in Lansing, Michigan, and we began to talk, and he began to tell me about how I could be able to get money for college and be able to get experience and training flying. And I told him my desire was to get into aviation, my love for airplanes. He says, well, I have just the program for you. You can go to boot camp this summer, your senior summer, and you can join the reserves and drill 1 weekend a month and come out in your last year in high school as a senior. You'll be drilling 1 weekend officially in the military, and then we'll send you through all your schools, which will consist of basically 9 to 12 months afterwards. And then you can start college, and you can do as much of the reserves that you want, as much flying that you want, and you will go places that you'll never be able to experience. And that's what happened for me. And it was a wonderful experience in my young life. I'm very thankful that I was able to qualify and go into that special program. My mother had to sign a waiver because I was honest with my age. I was not 18 and of age. And I know some of our men during World War II, they fibbed about their age so they could get in. You had to have proof in the 80s of your age. So I'm thankful that my mother was willing to sign the waiver, and I was willing to take a step, whether that was being naive or real gutsy, maybe a little bit of both, to go in the military at such a young age. But it was a hard experience being in boot camp. It was also a growing experience, and I came out with a much deeper focus of my future. I like to say it was a transformational time, or to use a religious terminology, it was epiphany experience, a very difficult crucible in my life. It was very difficult at Great Lakes in Illinois, one of the coldest summers I ever experienced. And I managed to get through that and moved into my military career. My last year of high school, drilling 1 weekend a month, and it felt really good to be in the military and be in high school at the same time. I was the only one in my class in the whole school of, I believe, 700 students that had military dog tags and things like that. So that was what I needed at that very very pivotal time in my life. I needed a boost. I needed a direction, and I believe it was the providence of God that led me to going into the military at a young age. And I had a wonderful career in the reserves, and I have wonderful memories I was in a reserve squadron, a P-3 squadron. I was showing pictures of P-3 Orions. They are anti-submarine warfare aircraft. Do reconnaissance work, ASW, which is called anti-submarine warfare. And back in the 80s, that was still considered the Cold War era. And so we were very much spending a lot of funds, defensive funds, in the cat and mouse game of hunting for those red Octobers. And so we were a reserve squadron, and so we were made up of prior full-time enlisted and officers, and we had everything. We traveled. We traveled all over the United States to train. We would go to Brunswick, Maine, and to Jacksonville, to Virginia Beach, Norfolk, out to Whidbey Island in Washington. At a young age, my biggest trip was in December of 1987. I took my first big trip to Puerto Rico for 2 weeks, and that was at the time that President Reagan called in the military to assist in the drug interdiction. And so we were called up as a reserve squadron, and so we went down to Puerto Rico, and they had a big Navy air base called Roosevelt Roads, and that's where we did our duty. And we would work with a Coast Guard frigate, and we spent 12 to 14 hours in the air rigging ships and doing runs in the Caribbean. It was a great experience for me. Did a couple of deployments, one to a couple to Rota, Spain, and during that time I was able to go to the Azores for a couple of days, and also the Gibraltar. We were running back and forth through the mouth of the Rock of Gibraltar, and we actually did a mission into the Mediterranean right off the coast of I think it was Albania and Libya. Logged thousands of hours, pilot trainers and flights. Where I was located was up in Selfridge Air National Guard Base in Mount Clemens, Michigan. So we did a lot of pilot trainers out of Michigan up to Upper Michigan, which was very beautiful, and the relationships that was built. And I'd like to add, probably the most important part of that time in my life was the men and the women that God was putting into my path. And I want to thank God for the strong men of faith that He had put into my life. Because at that time I was not committed in my faith, was not grounded. I was a casual Catholic. I had not really made a commitment, and there was this flight engineer who always had a smile on his face, and I had really stopped going to church for a number of years, and he was sharing with me about the Mass and the joys of the Eucharist. And also a Catholic chaplain over in Spain that I remember confiding in, and his encouragement to me, and some other Christians that were telling me about a real loving relationship with Jesus that I had missed a little bit, or was part of my spiritual formation. But coming from a broken Catholic family, I had missed that. And believe that sometimes that confirmation, there has to be an adult confirmation that comes, and like Augustine, that happened to me too. I had an Augustinian conversion at 21, and I'm thankful for the men that God had placed in my life, the older men, and I listened to them and their stories, and I saw the best of men, and I also saw the worst in the military, and I'm thankful that God kept me on the good path, and it paid for my college at Michigan State University. I was able to go through college debt-free, received a Pell Grant as well, that I qualified for, and I had the best of everything. I had the traveling. I took one weekend in between classes. I went to Spain, ferrying an aircraft. Left on a Friday and came back on a Monday. And I went back to class, and they said, "Well, what'd you do over the weekend?" I went to Spain. We helped to ferry an aircraft over there and took a broken one back with the equipment inside. So I'm very thankful that and honored that God would call me to be a veteran and to serve in the military. And that's my story.
Where were you born? And how old are you today?
I was born in Detroit, Michigan, February 24th, 1968. So that makes me, it says on the age, a young 48. So, but I believe in the concept, you walk in the Holy Spirit, you're always 10 to 15 years your age. So I'm hanging in there at 34.
Do you remember, what was it like adjusting to life when you were in the service, going from civilian life to military life?
It was difficult, well, especially the crucible with boot camp. Was the being young and indoctrinated. At that time, boot camp was, I believe, tougher. There was a more mental strain that was there, and some men would crack. And it was a time of building. They break you down and then they build you back up. So it was a little bit of a hard adjustment with boot camp, but having went through graduation, I was so proud to be in the military that it was a very easy transition after that, and I was a diehard military man. Yep.
Do you still remember your instructors and everything that you went through during boot camp?
I do. Chief Beasy and Petty Officer Schaefer. I can still see their faces and have the smells as well, and can still remember some of the PT that they had us doing in boot camp, and all the extracurriculars. Yes, it's still with me after all these years, over 30 years.
Do you still remember the crew? Like you said, a lot of the crewmen were like strong faith. Were you good friends with all of the crewmen you served with?
Yes, I had a composite, just like where we live in today. We have the strong, and we had the weak, and we had those that were on a journey and had not discovered, and were trying to gain the pleasures of through the world. They had discovered the deeper pleasures through God. And so there was both. There was definitely both. I would say the minority were the men of strong faith, but they stand out. You know, they're like lights on a hill, in the words of Luke.
Are you still in contact with the men that you were friends with?
Unfortunately, I'm not. The time has gone by, and it was not possible for me to stay in contact with them. I would like to get back in contact with them again.
Why did you enlist in the Air Force?
In the Navy?
Yeah, sorry.
I enlisted in the Navy because it seemed like it was a good program. I heard good things about the Navy. I was guaranteed to be an air crewman and fly on these aircraft. And the Navy had a good reputation. It was what God wanted me to do.
Are you married?
I am. Been married 20 years.
Did you get married while you were serving?
I did not. I was afterwards that I was married. Officially was discharged in 1993 and I was married in April of 1996. But I'm thankful to the Lord that there was skills and gifts that were given to me that have helped me in my marriage.
What was it like living on the bases that you were at when you were traveling around?
It was fun. One experience was in Barbers Point, Hawaii, and I loved, or even back at the base in Michigan, would love to hear the sound of the aircraft coming in. The P-3s have a distinct whistle through the air and a hum with their engine. And I enjoyed being on the base and the activity when I was in Barbers Point of reconnecting with some old classmates there and seeing the different aircraft that they had. It was really all over. Whidbey Island, the mountains there, and the coldness of the crisp of the air to Puerto Rico. They all had different barracks and different styles, from one room to a big room with bunks, and so you never knew what you were going to get. To going out on the hotel, sometimes they would. We did a dead up to Amsterdam, and they put us up in the hotels and gave us a nice couple of days there. So that was a neat experience as well.
Were you ever issued any special equipment that, like, during your flying?
Yeah, we had flight suits that we all wore, and flight boots and flight jackets, both the leather flight jacket and the Nomex green jacket. And we also had flight gloves that we had to put on at certain times. Always carried our flight helmet in case there was an emergency. We always had our survival vests that we would put on at different times. We could take that off.
Did you ever see combat while you were flying?
No. Maybe you could say limited in some ways. We were working in the drug interdiction. That was probably the closest that I got to a combat zone. So that officially that really wasn't a combat zone, but our planes were getting shot at from time to time from drug runners. That didn't happen to us. I was very fortunate. I did not see the horrors of war or combat. I was spared of that.
Did you admire your commanding officers?
I did. My first commanding officer, he seemed to really have his act together. He was also an airline pilot too, and a commanding officer. So he was a reservist drilling, and then Commander Ehrig. Yeah, the three commanding officers during my tenure there were fine men, and also some of the higher ups. A certain Lieutenant Commander Ralph was there for me at a tough time in my life. We had some very good leaders.
How did you stay in contact with your family while you were serving?
Great question, because back then we didn't have cell phones. It was just a phone, and it would be a phone call. Time I was single, so it would be a call to mom. Every now and then to make a credit card call or something like that and touch base, but very limited communication compared to today. But I do recall making quick phone calls to her when I was over in Spain, in Hawaii, and letting her know we're fine, and it was a different world back then.
Where were you were you ever in a war, per se?
No, we were, like I said before, I not seen combat. The war did occur what was that called in 1991? Operation Freedom, I think it was called, something like that, where we invaded Iraq. But our reserve squadron was not called into that.
How did you return home?
You mean when I was done officially? I was, it was, when I was done, I was done. It was an easy transition, I guess you could say. I was not a full-time or regular Navy. I was a reserve, so I was honorably discharged.
When you returned home, was it easy to adjust to civilian life again? Because you had already...
No, it was difficult for me, and it continues to be in some degree because I miss it so much. You sometimes, as time goes on, you can say it's a wonderful sweetness there that's also bitter for me too, because how much I loved it and missed it. And when you know, it was a tremendous gift that God had given me, and I cherish that with some wonderful memories of that time. I never, since that time of 17 to 23, I've never traveled like that before.
What have you done since leaving the military?
I've done much. I was hoping to make a career in the military, in the Navy, and that just wasn't meant to be. I went into the ministry. I went to seminary at the time, and I had come into a deep relationship with God where He was real to me, and experienced Him that I had not before, as I explained to you, as growing up Catholic. And my family was divorced. My parents divorced when I was young, so I had, in a sense, was experiencing new things, and the sacred scriptures were becoming alive, and I was being exposed to great men of faith, and I was led into the evangelical church for a time, and which really centers on the scriptures and living your life, and so I was kind of led out of the Catholic Church there for a period of time. I went to a Baptist seminary, and then my desire was to serve the Lord, and I kind of gave my heart to that. And since then, He's had me on OJT, on the job training. I've done social work. I was a social worker. I've been a probation officer, an intern, a bivocational pastor, a corporate chaplain, a law enforcement officer, a substance abuse counselor, and then coming back to the church in my journey back to the Catholic Church and stepping down as a minister, the role of ministry development, fundraising. I've been doing that the last 10 years, fundraising and development, and now going into real estate here, and serving at the Vines Hospital as a crisis intake counselor, and as a lay chaplain today. So it's been an odyssey for me.
So, what did your experience in the what did your experience during the service have effect on your life?
It's had a tremendous effect. I'm trying to keep the tears back. Tremendous. I appreciate my country. I have a flagpole, and the majority of the time, the flag, the stars and stripes flies. I'm appreciative of the freedoms that our country has and our forefathers. And the military gave me experiences personally that I could never have outside of the military. I wouldn't be the man today if I had not gone through that experience. I'm very thankful on the pragmatic level for my discipline, the discipline that I have of taking care of my body as well as my mind, as well as my soul. And being a Navy man or a SEAL, I have funneled that passionately into a spiritual discipline. My desire is to be a SEAL in the Catholic sense for the Lord. And in the Catholic Church, you can be a SEAL. We got some strong men and women of faith, and you can practice that out every day and practice the spiritual disciplines. So the military has helped me immensely to find and rediscover the Catholic Church that I had left when I was young, and to be willing to take pain and suffering for a deeper meaning and purpose.
What were some of the greatest memories you had during your time?
There's a lot of memories that I have. Great flights. I think the greatest memories that I have are the memories of being with a group of men that were committed to a common goal and a mission and an objective to fulfill, and working together in a brotherhood, a very deep brotherhood that separated, that really brought us together, even if we were living completely different lives and different attitudes and values. The mission would bring us together. And the experience of flying in these aircraft and doing the work, the radar, being a radar operator, and spending time on top of a submarine, on top doing submarine. We were actually tracking a Soviet Kilo class submarine, and that was a great thrill. To be in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in the middle of night with it storming and our planes bouncing all around, and we're tracking the Soviet submarine for 7 hours, and then we had another plane that was coming out. And some of the missions that we had deep in the Atlantic and the Pacific, and we're looking around and we're going below 500 feet and there's no land anywhere. We're doing the kind of flying that no commercial aircraft or civilian aircraft does, because the P-3 was such a strong aircraft. It could endure so many pressures, and could be out there in the middle of the Atlantic with it storming, and could even have one engine loitered sometimes and continue to do its work and its mission. So,
what were some of the most important life lessons you learned while you were in the service?
Duty, honor, commitment, integrity, and not to quit.
What lesson would you pass on to today's current generation?
I would encourage them to seek the military if they would like to broaden their life. The Marine Corps and the Navy, the Army and the Air Force, whatever they're called into. And there's always, don't listen to all the naysayers or the critics. there's a lot of good that's in our military. We need good people. And also, if you're willing to be molded, that the military can be a great way to take you places that you could never imagine going. It's an opportunity to serve and also to be served. It's an opportunity to grow as a young man or a young woman, mentally and physically, and I also believe the most important ingredient, spiritually. In the words of St. Augustine, our hearts are restless until we find rest with Thee. And I was a restless young man. And it was a very pivotal time where I found rest in Him. And those were the experiences of being in that aircraft and going around the world.
Is there anything that you'd like to share that I forgot to ask you about during your service?
A love for my country and a desire to do it all over again. If I could do it over again, I would. I would have signed up earlier, tried to get in earlier, and if I could, I would have been a lifer. And if I had to, I would have given my life for my country.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.